Hello, my name is Chris DeBikis, Lead Service Engineer with Heidolph North America, and today I'll be discussing with you how to install your Hei-Vap Industrial Distimatic. Step one is going to be installing your Distimatic A distributor. Now, if you already have your glassware already set up, this is going to be an easy swap out. If you're installing the Distimatic with the unit itself, you will have to dig through one of the boxes in the main Distimatic box in order to find this piece. So I'll show you right now how to replace or install this piece here. So if your glassware is already in place, remove your KS64 clamp that holds your steam tube to the A distributor already in place. You can lift up the steam tube and just let it rest on one of the supports. Then we're going to loosen up the distributor collar. We will then remove the split ring, and then the collar will slide right off. We'll grab the Distimatic A distributor, slide the collar on, split ring goes into place. And then we'll just pop the A distributor in place, screw it down. Get your steam tube in position, and then reinstall your clamp. So in my hand, I'm holding the original A distributor that comes with the traditional glassware assembly. Now, if you have a Distimatic without residue removal, you will not need to replace this part. If you do have residue removal, this new A distributor will have to go into place. Okay, so step two is going to be installing the Distimatic mounting bracket, and we will be installing that on the back panel. Okay, so with the Distimatic, you will get the mounting bracket along with a bag of screws in order to mount this bracket to the back panel. And what you're going to want to do is about 8 inches down on the side here is where you're going to want to drill your first little pilot hole. So grab your drill, 1/8 of an inch bit will work, and mark it off, and then just go ahead and drill through. Now we'll get that initial screw caught. Grab your nut and washer. Okay. Next, what I'm going to do is get this up, take a bubble level, try to get this bracket as level as you can. Once we're in position, we'll mark out the top hole on the left here. There's also another hole on the bottom. You want to mark those two holes there, and then we'll drill out. So we'll drill the bottom hole. And then we could also drill out the top hole here. From there, we'll just finish installing the rest of our screws. And once you have your screws in place, you can get yourself a 5mm socket, or if you have a small adjustable wrench, that'll work just fine as well. And you're also going to need a T10 Torx drive. And just tighten down the bracket. Okay, so once you have your bracket in place, grab your Distimatic box. Let me point out a couple quick features here. One, we have the flask sensor. That's the flask refill sensor. We have our emergency stop button here. Power switch, and then on the very bottom of the Distimatic box here we have our condensate pump, This here is our product refill valve. This is our product refill vessel. This here, which will be winding up inside of the evaporation flask, is the refill sensor itself. And the other cable coming off is going to be for your control panel. So with this Distimatic box, it's as easy as just sliding it in. Make sure you're not going to pinch any of the wires. The condensate pump will fall right into place. And now we just mounted the Distimatic box. Okay, so step 3 is going to be installing your valve matrix bracket. So with that, you're going to have this bracket. It's got the springs, this kind of C support on there. Then you'll also have a bag that's going to have 3 different kinds of screws in there, and then also a KS40 clamp. In order to install this, we will have to remove the brackets that are in place. Whether or not you have the glassware already installed or you're installing from a new unit, these brackets will be in place. So with that, you're going to need a T20 Torx drive to remove the 6 screws that hold these 2 brackets in place. Okay, so now that you have your condensate flask collector brackets removed, now we're going to install the valve matrix bracket. To do that, you'll notice that there's a bunch of holes that are on the side here. Those are for all different styles of brackets. The holes that we're going to be working with are the second one from the front, then this middle one here that's a little bit above that, and then we'll be working with that hole right there. So just get your bracket lined up. Get the first screw caught. And then from there we'll get our other 2 screws connected. Okay, and we'll tighten these down for now, but we may have to loosen them up to slide the bracket back and forth so you get a better alignment with the glassware up on top once we get our round bottom in place here. So that's how you install your valve matrix bracket. Okay, so step 4, what we're going to do now is modify our 3 two-way valve and then our vacuum valve on the valve matrix. So get yourself a small adjustable wrench. Now you'll notice that on the 3 two-way valve it's labeled ventilation and evacuation. So the 2 barbs that we're going to be removing from this here are going to be the center one and the one on the evacuation side. So simply just break it loose with a pair of adjustables. And in the Distimatic box, you will receive a bag that will contain these 4 parts, along with some additional tubing. But these here are going to be used for the vacuum lines going to both our valve matrix and then also our 3 two-way valve. Okay, so you'll notice 2 of these fittings have the same thread. One's a little bit bigger. The bigger threading is going to be for the valve matrix. The 2 smaller ones are going to be for our 3 two-way valve. Okay, so to install, basically, we're just going to screw it in. And with these 2, you don't want to really torque down too hard because you will snap the threading. Trust me, from my experience. So once you get them in place, just give them a little bit more of a tightening, maybe a 1/4 turn or so, and you should be good. Now for the valve matrix here, we want to take off the hose barb that is on the vacuum valve right here. So again, this one may be a little more snug. And then we'll take our other fitting. Same thing, screw it in, get it hand tight, and then maybe about a 1/4 turn. And those are the subtle modifications that need to be made to both the 3 two-way valve and your valve matrix. Okay, so once we have our valves modified, The next thing you're going to want to do is install the sensor that goes into the condensate flask on your valve matrix. So this black cap here, remove this. Take your sensor and then just screw this all the way into place. And then once you have that sensor in its sleeve, just pop the sleeve back in to the condensate vessel and you're good to go. Step 5, we're going to be installing your 3 two-way valve. With the 3 two-way valve, you will be getting 2 little screws, and this valve mounts to this manifold on the back here. So basically, just pop your center fitting right through the hole. Take your screws, drop them in place. Take your Phillips drive and screw the valve into place. Okay, step 6, we're going to be installing the valve matrix and then also the holding flask above the valve matrix. So we'll put this in first. Basically what you're going to want to do is loosen up your bolts on the bottom of your bracket. We're going to slide in the bottom. Get that in place. Now we're going to push down on the springs and get this flask connected to our Y joint. Okay, once that's in place, we'll get our KS40 clamp. We'll get that in place, tighten it down. And then we don't necessarily need to keep this bracket level. The main purpose is just to hold this flask into place. So once it looks like it is level, at least straight up and down, then we'll tighten up these bolts here. And then we'll grab our valve matrix. Now you'll notice on the valve matrix on one side there is a spring, so that connector just swings out. You're going to want to bring these screws up kind of high, but don't pull them all the way out. Then now we're going to connect this white piece here to the bottom of that round bottom. Okay. Once you have that in position, just start tightening down these screws. And we're almost going to want to have this black piece touching the white portion of the valve matrix. That'll ensure that we have a good vacuum seal. And then we'll run our cable right through this spot right here underneath the water distributor. I typically do it this way just to kind of keep wires out of the way and clean it up. You can pull it up through the top here if you want, but then you're just going to have a bunch of wires hanging out here. It's going to look a little sloppy, so I try to tie everything up to the back here. So once you got your cable run, just let it hang and then we'll install all the cables when we get everything else in place. So step 7, we're going to start installing the vacuum tubing for the Distimatic and the valve matrix. So in your package you should receive a roll of 8mm tubing. You may also receive possibly maybe about a 3-foot length of tubing that would be specifically for hooking this system up. But if you get one big roll, you could use this 8mm tubing. Okay. So out of that roll of tubing, you're going to want to cut 3 lengths. First length is going to be 24 inches. Your second length is going to be 6 inches. And your third length is going to be 14 inches. Okay. So with our 14-inch length tubing, let's start over. Not from that. After we cut it, then, okay. So the first thing you're gonna wanna do when we're gonna start installing this new tubing is disconnect the vacuum line that comes out of the back column here. Now be careful when you do take these caps off because they are in two pieces. You essentially have the ferrule and the cap. If you lose the ferrule, it will have an effect on the way the vacuum works on the system, so be mindful of those. So what we're gonna do now with the tubing that comes out of this column, there's a hole on the top of this mantle right here. We're just gonna fish that line right through there. Next, you're gonna grab your T-coupling here, and we are going to connect this to our vacuum line coming out of the back of the cabinet. Then we will take our 6-inch line we will be connecting this T to the vacuum valve down here in the valve matrix. And then we will be taking our 14-inch line and connecting that to the bottom of the 3 two-way valve. Okay, so lastly we're going to install our 24-inch length of tubing. That's essentially going to be going to where it says vacuum out on this manifold, and it's going to loop around then come into the 3 two-way valve. Now just be mindful of this tubing. It is pretty rigid, so when you're working with it, just be cautious about kinking it. You don't want to put a kink in the line, otherwise you're just going to have to cut yourself a new length of tubing, and I guess it's not the end of the world. Okay, and now your Distimatic system is hooked up to your vacuum system. Step 8, we will be installing the condensate drain line and then also your product feed line. In the Distimatic box, you will receive a roll of 6mm tubing. You will want to cut one length 75 inches and another length 28 inches. So we're going to install our condensate drain line first. So get your tubing that's cut at 28 inches. And we're going to connect the tubing on the bottom of the condensate flask. Now, you may receive the condensate flask and this little fitting down here might be facing a different direction. Just loosen the black cap, get your fitting kind of facing towards the back of the unit. Take your tubing, take off your little cap and ferrule. Attach that line, and this will go to the underside of the Distimatic box to the condensate valve. This will go from the bottom of your condensate vessel to the condensate pump. And if you get a chance to look at the pump on the bottom of this box closely, you will notice that there are arrows that direct which way the flow is going. And screw that in place. And now we have our condensate drain line installed. Next, we will take our 75-inch length of tubing. We're going to connect it to the bottom of the product feed valve right here. Okay, we got that in place. Now, on the back of your Distimatic, you have the piece that has the sensor, and there's 2 other caps that aren't being used right now. We will be using those. So we're going to install this next. And then we'll run our product feed line through the cap. The one thing I do want to point out on this cap, you will notice 2 different sizes that are not being used. One is for the 6mm line, the other is for the 8mm residue line. So as of right now, we're just going to install the product fill line, that 6mm line. So to route this cap, just put it through the hole that's on the back of the mantle. And then we are going to route this up to our A distributor on the Distimatic. So once we have our 3-port connection in place on our Distimatic A distributor, we're going to grab our 6mm product feed line, route that through the bottom. And you want to make sure that you route this tubing through the connector that has the smaller opening. So we're just going to push that through. Bring that product feed line about 2 or 3 inches past the neck of the flask. Tighten that down, and your product feed line is installed. Okay. Step 9, we're going to be installing the cutout sensor. In the bag you will receive this sensor. You'll also receive 2 rings like this. One is smaller, one is bigger. We are going to be using the smaller one. And there should also be a blue screwdriver in that bag as well. Ah yes, this little guy right here. This is for adjusting the sensitivity of the sensors, which we will be discussing at a later date. Okay, so to install this sensor, what you're going to want to do is actually loosen up this little white nut right there, bring your bracket up, and then tighten this one down to secure it in place. Okay, and then what we're going to do next is attach this to the very bottom underneath the bracket here. So basically between the bracket and this KS64 clamp, this is where the cutout sensor will be placed. And we will secure it with this band right here. So get that in there. Get that band caught and then catch the other side. And now with this cable here that's attached to the cutout sensor, we will route this through the same area that the residue line is routed. And then we'll go on the back and pull it all the way through. Okay, so step 10, we're going to install a couple check valves and then also an inline filter. So you have 2 different check valves. One is a 6mm check valve. That is going to be for your condensate valve. And then you have an 8mm check valve, which is going to be on the back side of your residue pump. So when you're installing the check valves, all you're really going to need to do is cut a piece of tubing no more than 6 inches. And the arrows do indicate the flow. So you want to make sure that you put this in the right way. Otherwise, there will be no flow. Get that connected. Put this on the back side of our residue pump. And then whatever residual tubing is left, whatever residual 8mm tubing you have left over, you can cut to the desired length, or you could leave it as is, totally your choice. And then we're going to do the same thing with the check valve. Another small piece of tubing. This is the condensate check valve. Again, make sure we have the direction of flow the right way. And this one will actually be going on the bottom of the condensate pump. So we'll remove that other cap. Get that in place. Okay, and that tubing is going to be the 6mm tubing. Now, you're going to have quite a bit of 6mm tubing left over. Typically what I wind up doing is I just cut it in half, and I'll use that residual line for the product fill valve, and then also coming off the back of the check valve. So to install the product filter, the product line filter, get the length of your 6mm tubing. We will unscrew the cap here. Slide it in, screw that down. Now, one thing about this, this filter here, not only is it weighted so it'll keep the line down at the bottom of your carboy or your bucket, there's also a frit disc filter that's in here. This thing has a tendency to clog pretty easily. So what you can do is just pop this cap off. You could remove the filter. And then if you want to get some kind of mesh filter to put in there that's going to be easier to clean and allow for better flow, by all means, I highly recommend it. Or what you can do if you want to continue to use this frit disc is I would say after every use, soak it overnight in some ethanol, really try to break down whatever material gets stuck in there. Okay, so then this part here will go right into the top of our product fill vessel. Pop that on. And now we have all of our lines in place. Okay, so step 11, we're going to be installing our residue pump and also the residue drain line. So you'll receive the residue pump and then a pack of cables. One is going to be a control cable, which is this guy here. And your other one is going to be the power cord. And as you can see, when you first receive it, it's going to be blank right here. So you just have to make sure you pick out the right North American connector for your power outlet. And it's as simple as pulling this little tab back, installing the power blades, and you're locked in. So from here, on the back and underneath the condensate pump, you can install your power cord, and then install your control cable. There is a little notch cut out here so you get this in the right orientation. Screw that into place. We will take off the caps here, remove these little black shipping caps. Put one back in. Okay, so out of that 8mm tubing roll, you're going to want to cut a length 58 inches. We're going to connect it from the back side of the residue pump, and then we're going to feed it into the evaporation flask. So we'll start by connecting the pump. You're going to want to feed the tubing. There's going to be a little gap right by the fan shroud between the condensate or the condenser cabinet. That's where you're going to want to route the tubing. And then we'll go around the front and feed the tubing into the evaporation flask. Okay, so when you want to get your tubing into the evaporation flask, loosen up this little cap here, the bigger of the two, and just start feeding your tubing through. And with this tubing, we want to make sure that this gets basically to the center of the flask here. And if you're going upwards, you may want to reroute it. Tighten that cap down. And then we could adjust that cap with the 3 valves on, or the 3 ports, to position that tubing. And then eventually, as the flask rotates, it will start drawing your drain tube towards the center. But if you get it started off that way for now, you're good. Okay, step 12, we're finally going to be connecting all of our control cables into the back of the Distimatic box. You'll notice when looking at the top of the back of the Distimatic box, you'll see all the connections are labeled. So it's as simple as either tracing back your cables to where they came from, or you can look at the pin configuration on the inside of these connectors and match them up with the lines. Okay, so we're going to do our valve matrix. Next, we're going to do our residue pump. Then we are going to do our 3 two-way valve. Next will be, and last, our cutout sensor. And you'll notice that there's going to be 2 ports here that we don't use. And then lastly, grab your power cable, and that plugs in right there. Now when I route all these cables, I do route them behind the control manifold here. It just kind of cleans up the cables, you know, so you don't have them hanging all over the place. And then I will cord them up, wind them up, and hang all the cables from the back of these connectors here to clean everything up. Step 13 is going to be installing your control panel for the Distimatic. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the cable that's already kind of hardwired into the Distimatic box, and we are going to route this through the same spot that we have our residue line coming from. And then we'll get on the front, we'll finish pulling it through and connect our control panel. Control panel in hand, pull the remaining cable through. Make sure it doesn't get stuck on any other components. And then you just plug it into the back. And you have installed your Distimatic. Again, my name is Chris DeBikis, Lead Service Engineer with Heidolph North America, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to watch the video on how to install your Distimatic. If you do have any further questions, please give me a call or an email at my information below.